Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today, Monday, June 29th, for our panel. So we're gonna have a nice conversation today with some senior leaders working at the intersection of climate and finance. Each is bringing a unique perspective with insight on how non-financial issues like climate change are having both an immediate and long-term impact on value for many stakeholders. This webinar is brought to you by Sierra Club New York City Group's Climate and Finance Committee of our Atlantic chapter here in New York. We as a committee aim to connect the dots between external risks such as climate change and the implications for economic stability. Of course, if you're interested in joining our group, please put your email into the chat. Additionally, just housekeeping, if you have questions for any of our panelists at any point, please feel free to put those into the chat as well. We will, of course, do our best to answer all the questions if time allows. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our guest speakers just to briefly introduce themselves. So Jeff, Dr. Sachs, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Jeff Sachs. I'm a university professor at Columbia University, and I direct a project for Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the United Nations called the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And thank you for having the discussion today.
Thank you, Dr. Sachs. Jeffrey, if you'll please share with our audience a bit about who you are.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jeffrey Potent. I'm an adjunct professor at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. I've been teaching there for about 15 years. I teach corporate sustainability, and I've also taught courses in sustainable agriculture. I'm a former official with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, when that agency actually existed as opposed to where it is today. I was in charge of corporate partnerships for the Office of Water in Washington, D.C., working primarily with the agriculture sector on sustainability and sustainable practices. And I also am involved in a number of local sustainable agricultural initiatives, including being on the board of an impact investment firm and serving on my congressman's agricultural advisory committee.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And last but certainly not least, Randy.
I am Randy Strickland. I am a director of investment advisory at Cornerstone Capital Group. We're an investment advisory firm, registered investment advisor based in New York City. All of our clients are looking to align their investments with their values, usually around issues of climate change, racial equity, gender equity, and the like. I also am an adjunct professor at Bard College and Fordham University teaching sustainable finance. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you all for being here today, and to our audience as well for joining us. My name's Roxy, so I am a member of our committee, also vice chair of our Sierra Club in New York City. So as you can see, we have a diverse panel. I believe we'd all agree that the financial community is taking a big interest in climate and specifically the transition to a low carbon economy. We've seen science-based research, including the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that describes our need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, as well as the introduction of corporate disclosure frameworks like Sustainability Accounting Board standards and the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosures. All of these, mounting pressure from the public and increasing demand from investors about these business risks associated with climate change. So broadly speaking, Dr. Sachs, how have you seen the concept of sustainability evolve over time?
Thanks a lot. Well, I think almost the whole world except maybe a few CEOs of oil, gas, and coal companies and our idiot president of the United States know that this is a real issue and that we need to decarbonize the economy. So I don't think that there's much doubt about this. And the bankruptcy of Chesapeake Energy, the leading fracking company, shows that investment in oil, gas, and coal is just a miserable investment at this stage. The world needs to decarbonize. The IPCC report that you emphasized rightly says we need to decarbonize by mid-century. This is all very basic. If we did not have a completely corrupt political system in the United States, it wouldn't really be an issue. Basically, it is a fact that in countries with a lot of oil, coal, and gas, politics are pretty hard because the oil lobby is traditionally the most important lobby in the economy. It's been tightly linked with the military-industrial complex for a century, and most of our foreign policy has been geared towards oil and gas for a long time. But this sector is disappearing step by step, despite the Republican Party, which is a subsidiary of ExxonMobil, if you didn't notice, but basically is owned and operated, or the Republican Party is just owned and operated by the oil lobby. But it's really an untenable situation. We have 38 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the Arctic Circle this week. Come on, how insane are we? And the fact that we have let this go on in this country is because Exxon, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, and the Republican Party have basically been in a conspiracy to keep fossil fuels alive as long as possible. But it's coming to an end. The whole industry is dying, and none too soon. The coal industry is basically bankrupt. It's down to a few tens of thousands of workers, and out of 150 million labor force. Oil and gas has really hit the skids. There is no future for fracking in this country because it's not economical, and not because there's any change of the Republican Party or president's position, but even Trump and all his executive orders and Mitch McConnell and all of their intent to wreck the planet could not save Chesapeake Energy. So the main point I would emphasize about all of the issues about investment going forward is that it makes no sense to invest in oil and gas. And if big banks like JP Morgan continue to do so as they've been doing, they're stupid. They're going to lose a lot of money. It's been an absolutely terrible investment to be in the oil or the broader hydrocarbon and especially the coal sector over the last 10 years. Divestment wasn't a moral issue. Divestment was the most practical issue. The students at the universities knew a lot better than all these sophisticated portfolio managers and trustees of the universities and so forth who got it all wrong because they didn't understand that the world absolutely needs to change. So this is my basic message. Keep your eyes open. Understand political corruption for what it is. We made a political system that is geared towards large contributions by lobbies to get the politics that they want. That's why our country's in such a mess, or it's a lot of the reason why our country's in such a mess. The truth is reflected in international agreements like the Paris Agreement. Trump can't stand the truth because it goes against his psychopathy as well as the interests of the Republican Party. And so he's pulled us out of the Paris Agreement, but we're the one country out of the 193 UN member states that's pulled out, and President Biden will put us back in to the Paris Agreement next January. So we'll have that on our side as well. There are many other environmental issues that I could mention, but I think climate change is the biggest of them all. We're up against a lot of powerful lobbying and an industry that until 5 years ago was so powerful politically that they couldn't imagine that they would fade away, but they are going to fade away. Their stock market capitalization's down. I didn't check this morning, but it's been down 25–30% year over year. And these bankruptcies are a good thing because the last thing we need in this country is fracking. Now, finally, what should we be doing? We need to decarbonize by mid-century. And that is not so complicated, thankfully, because renewable energy is already at grid parity with the fossil fuel energy. So we're not even fighting against the market. We're fighting against vested interests and protected interests. So we need to have 100% zero carbon energy system. We need to electrify transport, both light duty vehicles and heavy duty vehicles. We need to produce hydrogen and other green fuels with renewable energy for certain purposes, such as ocean shipping. We need to have green synthetics developed for aviation or maybe some limited biofuels. We need to have a building code that electrifies our buildings and retrofits them, creating millions of jobs along the way. And we need to have specific plans for the key heavy industrial sectors, petrochemicals, metallurgy, cement. It's a pretty well-defined agenda. We have the time to do it. Europe is going to do it with its Green Deal. And the United States is going to have a Green New Deal. And we're going to find when we're past the Trump era that this is also the best way to put people back to work and to create a post-COVID recovery.
Thank you, Dr. Sachs. So I think that was a great outline of some of the challenges and solutions ahead. You alluded to, certain industries and energy, the costs of capital rising, and the innovative solutions around stimulus packages, which are designed to boost green infrastructure projects. So we have many things to look forward to.
Absolutely. And by the way, the U.S. chapter of this Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which I mentioned briefly, is going to come out with a Pathway to 2050 report on October 1, which we'll be happy to share with you in preview with the Sierra Club and with others. But the idea is to show a specific technology pathway year by year, actually, with the investments, the job creation, and so on, to show how these major sectors, power generation, transport, buildings, and heavy industry, can fit into this picture. It doesn't solve all the environmental problems, but it does address a big one. And final word, and then I apologize that I have to, I'm going to have to run. Final word is that we need to do this together with all other regions. I spent the morning 2 hours on greening the Belt and Road Initiative of China, because that's also a coal-based investment project for the moment, and it's got to get green. And so we're going to have a lot of diplomacy needed. Fortunately, Europe is exactly on track. Some other regions are as well, but the idea of a post-COVID green recovery will be, I think, a worldwide theme.
Great, great. Well, we'll look forward to sharing out those resources with everyone. And thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you. And thanks to Randy and Jeffrey. And I know that they will pick up all the points and carry them much farther forward. So thank you, Roxy.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
So I'd like to continue this piece of the conversation. Randy, this question's directed for you. How have you seen sustainability issues alternatively called environmental, social, and governance information, or ESG data? How have you seen that become integrated into the financial community?
Well, thank you, Roxy. I would say there's still a long ways to go. So ESG, as you said, environmental, social, governance, are non-financial factors that a lot of portfolio managers now are incorporating into their investment decisions in order to pick securities that have the best chance to outperform. We look at it from that these non-financial metrics have financial materiality. And indeed, in recent years, ESG funds have outperformed, generally speaking, their peers, their non-ESG peers. So it isn't just this tree-hugging, hippie types that are just trying to do good. We really feel as though these factors are essential to outperforming, as well as creating change. Of course, that's the motivation for us in this space. Many portfolio managers also welcome a lot of this information. So you're talking about issues of diversity, issues of greenhouse gas emissions, disclosures of those types. And that's the sort of ESG data that portfolio managers are looking at. And the more of that they get, the more that they can better value a company and make the appropriate decision.
Great. Yeah, I've been reading a lot in the news these days, given the economic downturn and the volatility in the market. Certainly companies, that are incorporating ESG or, other performance measures that are not just about bottom line performance, but about sustainability performance are definitely, showing some resilience there. So Jeffrey, if you could also, share with us from your perspective, how, what role do companies play in driving some of this change for sustainability?
Thank you. You noted sustainability and bottom line. Well, it's actually one and the same nowadays because we're beginning to realize that sustainability performance in its broad definition, maybe not in the very, very short term, but in all cases, but certainly in the long term, for all cases, sustainability performance and bottom line performance are one and the same. And even in the short term, we're beginning to see that non-sustainable performance creates risks which undermine short-term value. So more and more companies and investors are beginning to understand, as Randy said, the materiality of sustainability. And what's meant by materiality from the investor's point of view is, will my portfolio do well? Will my portfolio face undue risk? And certainly a company performing sustainably reduces risk and yields greater profit in the big picture. So what I focus on in my work is not so much on the investment side, but helping companies to actually perform in a way so that they achieve or embrace sustainability criteria or attributes. Attributes in terms of the overall company and attributes in terms of individual products and services. And Jeffrey Sachs noted that we need to move toward a carbon-free economy. Well, we can't do that basically living fat, dumb, and happy, pardon me, the way we've been living in the United States. We not only need to shift our energy sources to renewables, but we also need to change our business models. We need to be lean in the way we produce goods and services, and we need to produce goods and services that bring real value to people. If we're going to continue producing a lot of junk and marketing that junk and encouraging people to buy things they really don't need, we're just going to continue to fill up landfills regardless of whether we're using solar energy to produce that stuff. So it's a combination of changing our energy sources, but also changing what we produce and how we produce. And Jeff Sachs started to allude to that when he talked about changing the way heavy industry produces products and services. But we really need to rethink our entire economy. And that means companies need to change their strategic planning to pay attention to producing goods and services that really bring value to people, and also produce those goods and services in a way that is inherently sustainable. And again, Jeffrey referred to climate change, but we're dealing with a whole host of other environmental challenges, not the least of which is biodiversity loss, which is being caused in part by climate change, but also by land use patterns. And our COVID-19 virus is a zoonotic virus, which many experts are saying is entering the human population because of our damage to natural world and our close proximity to animals that we never had contact with before through wet markets and other invasions into the natural world. So when it comes to companies, they need to consider these things. They need to consider how to move their energy sources to renewables, but they also need to look at their natural capital impact. And luckily now there are many tools that companies are embracing that allow for what's called natural capital valuation, where they can look at, on a company-specific level, how they're impacting the natural world and how they can reduce that impact. You folks might want to research a company called Puma and their parent company called the Kering Group, which was really the trendsetter in natural capital valuation, and looking at what is their real impact on the natural world. And if they had to actually pay for that impact, they probably would be unprofitable companies. And that revelation has changed the way that group is operating, and many other companies are emulating this practice to reduce their impacts and to be good, sound, sustainable producers, so that they embody those criteria that Randy and his colleagues can identify and put money and investments into those companies to help those companies excel and do well in the marketplace.
Yeah, and I can just pick up a little bit on that. I think it's clear that we all see climate change as a systemic risk, and by that we mean that there is a risk on financial assets to climate change. We did a study recently called "No Place to Hide," at Cornerstone, where our market strategists look at financial assets and the amount that are at risk due to climate change. We believe it's somewhere between $5 to, I think it's $30 trillion of financial assets at risk, of global financial assets that can be lost. And that's not including real estate. So that's things like agriculture, transportation, air, road, rail, and sea. These are things that Dr. Sachs was referring to earlier. And you can't just avoid them. So divestment is one way that some investors are approaching it, but actually you have to be more proactive in your investments and invest in solutions to systemic climate change.
Thank you for that. Yeah, we are seeing, climate change is one of those issues that is impacting all companies across, asset classes. So whatever sector or industry, they are experiencing either immediate impacts or what could be called acute impacts from flooding and storms. But we are also, and as Jeffrey Sachs mentioned, seeing the impacts to asset valuation in the energy sector, what many of us might know as stranded assets. So infrastructure and capital investments that in the long run will no longer be useful. So agreed, much agreed there. So I'd like to continue the conversation and just focus a bit more on what obstacles remain and kind of how can we overcome these in terms of understanding the issues of sustainability. Randy, let's start with you. And what gaps still exist when it comes to measuring that impact in the finance community, and yeah, what collaborations or best practices are you seeing out there that investors are turning towards?
Sure, sure. I think the biggest obstacle right now is disclosure as well as the quality of data that is disclosed. So there are a lot of data providers and other third parties that collect information on disclosure as well as best practices, SASB, GRI, Sustainalytics, and the like. They rely, however, on disclosure of things like greenhouse gas emissions and other ESG metrics from the portfolio companies that investors are that are included in indices and various investment portfolios. So um, I think it was CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, they gathered, and I'm working from memory here, which is a little faulty, but I think it's only of the largest publicly traded companies that they follow, I think it was somewhere around 70 to 80% are actually disclosing carbon data, which is good, but it isn't enough at this point. And that's the large cap companies, and it gets a little worse when you're talking about smaller capitalization companies. And then private companies are not necessarily required to disclose anything. So from an investment standpoint, getting enough data so that you can make a decision, informed decision as to which companies are best positioned for the long term gets to be somewhat challenging. Policies, of course, is another matter. So sensible climate change policy, which I think Dr. Sachs was pretty candid about his thoughts in that regard. We're hopeful that that will get better in the future, but that is also part of the obstacles that we as investors face in order to really weed out those not only funds that are greenwashing or appear to be sustainable but are not, as well as companies that we should just avoid because there are long-term risks embedded within their business models.
Great, thank you. And I think that's a great turning point, Jeff, for you to share with us, what about these companies whose, they're large behemoths, they've been around for decades, what challenges remain in kind of shifting our focus in, traditional business to sustainable business?
Well, I think an underlying challenge for not just business, but our entire economy is that it's based on a growth model. We pray to the God of economic growth. I mean, if you listen to data on the state of the economy, invariably commentators will say, well, the gross national product is growing by X%, or China is just booming, theirs is growing by Y%. Well, you cannot have continuous economic growth on a finite planet. We are overstripping the carrying capacity of this planet. So there are many people who advocate what they call a no-growth economy. And that sounds good in rhetoric, but that's not a solution to the existing growth model. We need a new kind of growth model. What we need, we shouldn't be championing no growth. What we should be championing is no growth in material throughput, in fossil fuel-based energy throughput, and in toxic substance-based throughput in our economy. Those are the things that we must stop the growth of. What we do need is growth in utility, in things that benefit people. We all are benefiting, we all on this call are benefiting from the global economy. We wouldn't be talking to each other today if we didn't have the riches of the global economy. I'm sitting in a comfortable home because of the global economy. I have a job because of the global economy, but there are billions of people who are not benefiting, who are barely subsisting because they have not benefited from the fruits of the global economy. So we can't just be waving the flag of no growth and forget about the well-being of those folks. But we can continue to grow if we can do so in a way that just doesn't pump more material and more dirty energy and more toxic chemicals into the environment. In fact, providing valuable goods and services to the people who are not currently part of the global economy is a tremendous business opportunity. And there are many companies that are becoming extremely successful by creating sustainable goods and services for not only us, those folks who are benefiting from the global economy, but the people who currently aren't. So we need to shift this current global growth model to a different kind of growth model. That's the tremendous opportunity, the tremendous challenge and tremendous opportunity that is presented for us.
Thank you. Thank you both. Yeah, great highlights there. I think, at this point we have about 20 minutes left in our webinar. So I would like to give our attendees the opportunity to ask questions. My colleague Satya is here, also a member of our Sierra Club Climate and Finance Committee. So, again, if anybody's interested in joining the committee, please, put your email into the chat box. And Satya, I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thank you, Roxy, and thank you to our panelists for a great discussion so far. We did have several questions that came in, and I think the first one that both of you have a lot of experience in is government incentivization of investment in these sustainable business models. So specifically, what is being done today at both the state and the federal level to financially incentivize sustainable business models? And are there specific asset classes that should be targeted if you were to design, the ideal policy regime, such as venture capital, private credit, or maybe others that people don't think of enough?
Randy, you want to go first? I can. Oh, go ahead, Randy. I'm sorry.
Just realized I was mute. I was going to yield to you.
Oh, hey. I can. I'm sorry. I can speak to that because I come from a public policy background, so I'd be glad to talk about that. I'm not going to talk broadly because there's so many different topic areas, but in terms of energy investment, the states here in the United States have been taking the lead in facilitating the transition to renewables through a whole host of mechanisms, notably something called the Renewable Portfolio Standard. Many states around the country have set standards requiring utilities to incorporate a set percentage of renewable energy sources into their mix of power generating facilities. And those states have been increasing those numbers over the years. New York State, where I live, is one of the, well, most of us live on this call, is one of the leading states in promoting renewable energy with substantive incentive and support programs. California is another leading state. Another area that I work in is agriculture, and there's been a tremendous amount of support, even at the national level, for let's say, environmentally responsible agriculture. They haven't done enough, and there's been some retracting over the recent years, but through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, an agency I used to work for, we provide a whole host of incentive programs, financial, technical assistance for farmers to move toward more environmentally responsible production systems. Unfortunately, that doesn't go as far as we need to go. We need to enhance those programs. But those are two examples where the state, in my first example, and the federal government, my second example, have been helping to promote sustainable practices.
I'll just pick up on that. There was the question about asset classes, and clearly the private equity, private debt permits you to be the most intentional. And by that, I mean, publicly traded companies, so if you're investing in an Amazon, and Amazon has come under fire recently in terms of its, some of the warehouses that they use to ship goods from. If you're investing in Amazon, it's harder to be very intentional there. It's a publicly traded company, and they have a very broad business model. And the same with any type of publicly traded company. But that said, one of the things that we do for our clients is our clients are looking to align their entire portfolio. And the fact of the matter is that most people will have and certainly institutional investors, if you're going after pension funds and endowments and you're trying to get them to invest in a sustainable fashion, they're going to cover all of the asset classes. So you have to look for solutions, and there might be a bit of nuance when it comes to publicly traded debt and equities. But that said, there are very intentional, and one of the other things is additionality that we look at. If not for this investment, would whatever outcome you're looking for have transpired or have occurred? And so across asset classes, you can look at it. But the one thing that solutions have to be is they have to be permanent, scalable. In most cases, they're going to be privately financed, but they still need to be supported by good policy, as I mentioned previously. And there is also this connectivity between climate and other themes, and both Dr. Sachs and Jeff have alluded to that. So you're not just aiming at direct climate change solutions. You're looking at, obviously, renewable energy, but food systems, as Jeff just referenced, agriculture, transportation, infrastructure, education. You can't get to a climate change solution without investments in those. And those cover broad asset classes. There is, I don't know if I can share the screen, but actually I can just, I don't want to promote my firm too heavily, but we have a piece on the Cornerstone Capital Group website called Scaling Climate Action. It's not a commercial for Cornerstone, but rather it does show solutions across asset classes, the types of things, not specific funds per se, but things that you might look at if you're investing for climate change. So in equities, you're going to be looking for funds that invest in companies that focus on clean, renewable energy, batteries and storage, electric grids, energy efficiency, agriculture, water, and companies serving those industries. And the fixed income, you might invest in municipal bonds that are doing, in my hometown of Newark, New Jersey, the county issued a bond to clean up the water system there. They had high levels of lead and other contaminants in their water, very similar to what was going on in Flint. So those are things that are, some of these that require high minimums, but there are different investments that even the average investor can get into. And we all agree, and I'm pretty sure that everyone on this call agrees that climate change is an issue and something that we need to do something about. Then there are ways for all of us to get involved with our investment dollars.
Yeah, and Randy, we received a number of questions that probably, your background is ideally suited to answering. It's around data capture and how do you measure a company's existing, let's say the impact of their status quo, whether it's the carbon footprint or whatever impact their existing practices are having. And then once they implement their ESG solutions or their green initiatives, how do you measure the impact of that? If you could speak to, what are the best practices you use? What are the metrics that you guys look at? Anything along those lines. We had a number of questions about that.
Sure. This is a science that is constantly evolving. It's getting better. And you are looking at all of those. The way we do it at Cornerstone is we look at how a company or a fund is providing, we measure in terms of access. So to the extent that they are providing access to education, access to healthcare, access to clean water, access to renewable energy. And we've developed our own proprietary system, and we work with some of the data providers to get information from individual companies and then roll it up on a total fund, if it's a mutual fund level. And we come out with a score and we map that to the Sustainable Development Goals. And as I said previously, all of these goals are interrelated. So if you're looking at climate change, you have to look at the extent that they're providing access to clean water, access to healthcare, access to broadband, things of that nature, income inequality, because lower income communities, communities of color specifically, are greater impacted by climate change. And income inequality, as with climate change, is a systemic issue that is a systemic threat to the global economy. Hopefully that helps. I can break it down. It'll take me a couple hours to go through all of the work that goes into it. We're not the only ones that are doing this. There's GIN, which has its own impact measurement system as well, mostly for private companies. And there are others that are out there. S&P Global is working on its own impact measurement, Sustainalytics. So there isn't one standard yet. Hopefully we'll come to a standard in the coming years. But for now, the good news is that there are lots of players in this space that are trying to figure out how to measure the impact and that a company is doing in terms of its solutions to climate change. Investors are asking for that. They want measurable impact is as important to them as the financial return.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a lot of information, and we appreciate you synthesizing it for us. Jeffrey, one question for you. I think a lot of our attendees noted that you mentioned kind of a obsession with growth is driving a lot of the problems and kind of growth at all costs. And many of them have read a book called Donut Economics, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But it's really about sustainability and finding a sweet spot, let's say, that balances growth with resource use. In your experience, how realistic is it that we can transition to that type of economy, and what have you seen industry participants are doing to get us there?
I don't think we have a choice. We have to transition or we're gone, period, putting it bluntly. I'll tell you a tongue-in-cheek story to start this out. A few years ago, Tesla came out with something called the Powerwall, which is a home battery system that you can plug into your solar. By the way, I'm on solar today. Boast that. But you can plug this battery system into your solar system, and as a result, you can store your power when you're not using it, and hopefully be, if not grid independent, certainly be using more power, generating more power throughout the day and night than you're actually using from the grid. So there was an article that came out quickly after that that said, well, the average American would need to buy 7 Powerwalls so they can charge up and power up their air conditioners, their color TV sets, their game stations, and every other little gadget that we love in this country. So the harsh reality is that there's no way we're going to get to this alternative if we're using so much power and buying so much stuff. So we have to get to what are we really trying to do here? What is this all about? What it's all about is meeting people's basic needs and hopes for the future. And how can we do this without so much stuff? I mean, that's really what we have to do. And the whole business model needs to shift to providing real human utility, real improving human well-being. And that's the only way we're going to do this, because if we don't do it that way, if we don't understand really what people need, how businesses can satisfy those needs rather, we're going to have a freeze in the dark scenario. That we're either going to have to shut down our economy to protect the environment, which obviously is not going to happen. That's a fanciful notion, even if it were practical, which it's not. We have to, and companies have to explore how they can meet people's needs in a way they can make some money, because that's the bottom line. A company, and this is what I tell my clients quite often, a company might call me and say, we want to improve our sustainability performance. And I talk to their staff and they come up with a laundry list of hundreds of things they can do. And what I say to them is, well, if you implement all these things, you're going to put yourselves out of business, because you're going to spend so much money on various unfocused, non-strategic sustainability initiatives that you're going to overwhelm your company. So what you really need to do as a company is figure out how you could bring your core values to the marketplace to produce goods and services that meet people's needs and build a profitable business around that, and do it in a way that reduces, as I said before, the material throughput of your company, the fossil fuel throughput, and also the toxic substance throughput. And if you could do that, that's the sweet spot. And that's how you as a company can succeed, by bringing value to the world and being profitable. And then you're meeting that materiality objective that the investment community is looking for, where you're optimizing environmental, social, and governance performance with a business case, a business model that helps you to generate revenue and succeed in the marketplace. That is what, when we're talking about corporates and when we're talking about investors, that's what we're talking about, is finding that sweet spot.
Yeah, and that certainly seems to be the best way to break a lot of the almost cultural impediments of moving away from a growth at all costs mindset.
Yeah, I can add one thing to that. One of the other obstacles we're having in terms of investors, and I'm glad Jeff brought up those points, is there still is this notion that one can't invest sustainably and achieve market rate returns, despite all the evidence to the contrary. There have been 2,000 some studies, I believe, over the last 20 years, and the consensus view is that one can get, at a minimum, the same performance, and we believe you can outperform, and there's demonstrated, there's data that suggests that that's the case. I know that the University of California system recently divested from fossil fuels. They didn't do so for moral reasons. They did so purely for financial reasons. They feel that's best for the fund and best for the participants in that in their pension and endowment schemes. So that's an obstacle that we have, is the people that are in that controlling large sums of money right now still have an old way of thinking. And either they're going to die out or that, but we can't really wait for that. So part of what we all do in this community is the impact investment and sustainable finance community is really field building, because we have no choice, because we still have to convince many of the powers that be that this is the appropriate way and the best way to invest. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that was great. And again, both of you have been really generous with your time, and we appreciate you spending the hour with us. Before we wrap up, one question that we had for each of you was, if you had one kind of core message as a takeaway for all of the attendees here, and one thing you wanted us to remember going forward, what would that be?
Good question. The fact that people are here and listening and interested means that they're at a minimum, everyone here is curious about how to, they've believe that this is, climate change is a real issue, and are interested in figuring out how they can respond, not only with their dollars, but also with their votes. And so I would just encourage people to continue to read, to look at. There's a ton of sources and a lot of information. I know Columbia University does produce a lot of data. So I'll give you a shout out there, Jeff. And there are lots of other sources of really good, solid information. So it's just sort of spreading the word and continuing to agitate.
And I would add to that, beyond voting and investing, get entrepreneurial. The thing that impresses me the most about the younger folks coming up today, as opposed to the baby boomers like myself, in our day, we cared about the social issues. So we went off and went to work for nonprofits. And then we quickly realized that in most cases, you can't raise a family and live a good life on a nonprofit. So that didn't work out too well. There are exceptions, of course. What I'm seeing today with young folks is that they're not so much thinking about joining nonprofits, although that's important, but when they care about the environment with real passion, and care about social justice issues with real passion, many of them are saying, how do I start a business? How do I start a benefit corporation that by its very nature is coming into business to, of course, succeed financially, but to meet human needs, to address issues of climate change and social inequity by bringing products and services to the marketplace. And I'm seeing so many exciting companies starting up as benefit corporations, as corporations that are triple bottom line or quadruple bottom line companies. So I strongly encourage those of you who are thinking about getting into the business world to think entrepreneurial. As well as voting and investing, you also need to get out there and create businesses that speak to these issues, because there are customers out there that want this. And when you bring these innovations to the marketplace, if you're doing it in a sound way, people will beat down your door. And I'm sorry to go on long, but let me just say that I work with a lot of sustainable farmers who were struggling to bring their products to the market because they were more expensive. They were sustainable, healthful products, but they were more expensive. Well, adding COVID-19, when people are being much more sensitive to the broader dimensions of what they buy and use, these companies are doing really well now. Some of the local farmers up here in the Catskills where I live are doing incredibly well now because the customers are realizing that these values are important. So there's a market for good quality, sustainable products. So go out there, invent them, and bring them to the marketplace.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Randy. Again, thank you to all our attendees. I would just, before we end, I think now more than ever is the time to speak up and sort of push ourselves into a little bit discomfort zone. So trying new things. And if we could just all pause to kind of memorialize this time in history. I think we really need to take a hard look around and see who's not included in the conversations that have sort of brought us to this point. And so I challenge you all to do that. And if we could just take a moment of silence together to close out this webinar. And with the ping of the technology, we'll come back to reality. Again, thank you, Randy. Cornerstone Capital, Fordham, Bard, MBA, very fortunate to have you. Jeff, all the farmers, all your work with sustainable businesses, very fortunate to have you. We are the Climate and Finance Committee of Sierra Club, New York City. So if you would like to become involved, please do not hesitate to provide your email address so we can follow up with the recording of the webinar and any additional information that you might be interested in. So with that, enjoy the rest of your Monday. We'll give you back the remainder minutes. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.